Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I am the Director of Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. MoAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibitions and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the challenging circumstances we are all in, and I hope everyone in the audience today is safe and healthy. MoAD stands in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. We honor and mourn the senseless murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and Andre Hill. We grieve for so many others who have lost their lives at the hands of state-sanctioned violence and racial injustice, including those whose names we do not know. As this list continues to grow, MoAD will continue to say their names as our commitment to honoring the victims and to attaining true racial justice is unwavering. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose land we are located. With deep respect, MoAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, we reside on unceded native lands and thank the indigenous people of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Tonight, I welcome you to MoAD Online and to the program series African Diaspora Film Club. Today's program marks the launch of our partnership with Black Public Media for the Film Club, and we're very excited about this partnership. Our host, as every month, Cornelius Moore, is the co-director of California Newsreel, the 52-year-old social issue nonprofit film distribution and production company. He is also an independent film curator specializing in works from and about the Black world. Modeled after a book club, we expect that you will have already viewed the film when you join us for this discussion. If you haven't already seen the film, please stick around. We just can't guarantee that we won't have any spoilers. I want to thank everyone here who has joined us, with special appreciation for those who have donated to the museum during this pandemic. We would not be able to produce this programming without your support. Today we'll be discussing the fabulous documentary, Mr. Soul. We are thrilled to have joining us for the discussion producer and director Melissa Haizlip. Melissa is an award-winning filmmaker based in New York. Her work responds to pressing social issues at the intersection of racial justice, social justice, activism, and representation. Female transformation and empowerment are at the core of all her ideas, with the goal being to advocate and amplify the voices of women and people of color. Melissa's feature documentary, Mr. Soul, has been awarded a finalist for the 2019 inaugural Library of Congress Levine Ken Burns Prize for Film, a new annual prize that recognizes a filmmaker whose documentary uses original research and compelling narrative to tell stories that touch on some aspect of American history. The film won Best Documentary at the 2018 International Documentary Association Awards. Mr. Soul premiered at Tribeca and screened at 50 festivals, receiving 16 jury and audience awards for Best Documentary and the 2019 Focal Award for Best Use of Archival Footage in an Entertainment Production. We'll start the discussion with Cornelius and Melissa, and we encourage everyone to participate by making comments in the chat and submitting questions through the Q&A box. And finally, please take a moment to type where you are joining us from in the chat. We love finding the diaspora in our audience. So thank you, Cornelius and Melissa, for joining us tonight. And I will jump away and leave it to the two of you.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth, very much. And I'm really delighted and thrilled that Melissa Haizlip is here. I'm a big fan of Mr. Soul for years. I couldn't wait for it to come out. I'll keep seeing it over and over again. So thank you, Melissa, for making this terrific film and for lifting up the legacy of Ellis Hayslip. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. And thank you to the Museum of the African Diaspora. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you so much, Cornelius, and for having us. And also to shout out to Black Public Media, Leslie Fields Cruz, and all our folks who've always supported this film from the very beginning. It's really important to shout out, especially because we are a film that was, believe it or not, financed entirely by grants and by
Mhm.
really important organizations that support emerging Black filmmakers and assure that we will have a place in public media and also out there in the culture. So shout out
Mhm.
to BPM and thank you so much. It's so great to be here. You know, the last time I was out in the real world in 2020 BC before Corona,
Mhm.
that was with you guys. I did a live screening on February 26th, like the last time I was out anywhere.
And it was the
Uh,
last film screening we did.
yeah, that was your jazz and
Black
film.
Power and Jazz, right?
Yes, Black Power and Jazz screening. I'd flown to San Francisco, and I remember that morning hearing the news of this strange pandemic that had just happened. I think the first case in San Francisco.
Mhm.
So we were like, whoop, let's do our screening and go.
Go. Yes, right, right.
And I
And
literally have not left my house since. So it's
really,
really
okay.
great to
I
see
was
you
still thinking
guys.
about that. It's like because you had just because the epicenter then was New York, and you were going
Exactly.
back to New York. So
Yeah, so
anyway,
I just want to shout out everybody, especially we know you're going through a difficult time. It's really important to acknowledge that, and all due respect for those who are suffering more and who've lost people. So I just want to acknowledge that because sometimes it's hard to celebrate our art
Mhm.
in amidst this crisis, and
Mhm.
I just want to acknowledge that we recognize that, and I see this film as a form of healing, a form of upliftment, and
Mhm.
a way to bring people together. So I hope that it can be somewhat of a balm in Gilead during these challenging
Mhm.
times. If you haven't seen the film, please try to see it tonight. It's free.
Yeah.
It would be really great if you could watch it. Thanks, courtesy of MoAD and Black Public Media.
Okay. And Cheryl Fields said hello from Black Public Media. So
Yes,
she's in it.
awesome.
She's joining. Yes.
Leslie's in the chat. Leslie Fields Cruz, you out
It
there,
said
Leslie?
it said Cheryl Fields. I don't
Okay,
know.
okay.
So eh,
Yes, please, y'all. Yeah,
no,
definitely hit us
Leslie
up in
isn't
the
here.
chat.
This is
Okay.
Leslie's sister, Cheryl.
Oh, hey, sis. Because, this is family. Can we
Yeah,
just be
right.
real? It's Sunday night. It's family. We're glad you're here. Hit us up also before I forget, in case you have to drop out. Please follow us on Instagram, on all the socials, Twitter, Facebook, at Mr. Soul the Movie. And, because we want to keep this conversation going. We're here for you too.
Hmm. Well, it's great. I mean, I like the way you phrased it as a bomb in Gilead. That this project and this great film can serve as that a healing um, for the audiences for anybody who's engaged with it in our country. It's just
Hmm.
amazing. So I'm going to begin by asking you the genesis of this project. I know that you have a familial connection with Alice Hayslip, but just tell us how how this project came about.
Well, the project came about because I felt it was really important to acknowledge this sort of lost treasure trove, this incredible archive of Black culture that really had been literally, in a vault for 50 some years. So it wasn't just that it was family. Ellis Hayslip is my uncle, and it was this legacy I wanted to uphold. But also I realized this is a story that we need so much. We need to understand our own legacy and where we are today, how we stand on the shoulders of giants. And there are people who
Mhm.
came before us that we have to recognize. And then when you think about all the amazing people in this film that represent the soul culture and that
Mhm.
moment, we are soon to lose many of our African American icons of the 20th century. And
Mhm.
so it was kind of a joint effort to not only revive this wonderful moment in Black culture and Black history, but also to really enlighten folks that we've always been excellent. We think of
Mhm.
like Black excellence as this new phrase and it's a hashtag and everything, but no, it's always been there. And at a time of great turmoil that we're in right now, it was important to remember that. And
Mhm.
so I was very interested in this because Ellis Hayslip is like a television pioneer and an icon, but he's a completely unsung hero. And it's really exciting to be able to discover that and for a new generation to discover soul, because soul was, for those who don't know, it's kind of like the greatest show you've never heard of,
Mhm.
but it's also this amazing moment in time. And it was a television show on PBS from 1968 to 1973. But it not only was it a vehicle for African American artistry, but it was a platform for political expression and the fight for social justice. And that's not the model we knew for television, and certainly isn't even today. So I thought it would be very exciting to show this moment in time when Black excellence was finally being seen on television, but it's also kind of the birth of diversity and inclusion on television. And that was very important, this idea of needing to reimagine ourselves on this American landscape and to be seen. This issue of being seen was really very key. So I realized I can combine all these things that mean a lot to me and also have this extraordinary story about soul, Black culture, Black music. And if we could get it right, you know, historically, accurately, and still make something that was provocative and interesting and entertaining, that's a lot.
It was
A big responsibility,
huge.
but we really wanted to do it. And I also saw that it was lacking, that this
Mhm.
kind of story was lacking. And how exciting to bring a new generation to soul, because it's also our all-stars, you know, our Black cultural all-stars, and to see them when they were young, so gorgeous, and when they were hungry and striving. And it's really important for us to see that now. We all know the household names from Patti LaBelle, you know, the versus battle with Patti LaBelle and Gladys Knight. But here was the original versus battle, 1968, right? And so that's kind of mind blowing. And it's nice to think not of Black history as Black history, but thinking of Black history is now. And so much of the story we need right now is to understand where we came from so that we can move forward.
I love in the film how you begin it with a context for people who were not around. I was around there at that time. But you know, where you have the logos from the three commercial television networks, NBC, ABC, CBS, where they're all talk about being in color,
Right.
and and yet, you know, colored folks weren't there. You know, yet we had to really scramble to find some of us on TV, but also the context for, I think, people who are not that generation who know that, well, there are three networks. There's one commercial network and there's a public broadcasting network, and also television was appointment television. And also to let people know that everything wasn't in color then. Even, I mean, films were filmed in black and white, and sometimes they were in color. Everybody didn't have a color TV. So just to give people who
or
weren't
a
around that
TV
context. Right.
Yeah, it was really important to set the stage for what this moment meant. It's so hard to look back now when we are in this moment of utter, total, extraordinary digital and virtual, you know, buffet. You can have whatever you want, basically, 24/7, 365. But there was a moment when there were limitations on television. And so we had to set that up in order to understand what soul was interrupting. Right, because you take it for granted now. We can watch anything at any time. There's tons of
Right.
content. There's a lot
Yes.
more agency. There's a lot more Black content and you
Mhm.
know, BIPOC stuff out there. But we have to see why it was so important that soul existed when that wasn't a possibility. And so you understand what he was interrupting, this sort of narrative of, you know, whiteness on television. And so at a moment when Black people were really trying to reinvent themselves after having come through, and we're still doing it, but you know, coming through Jim Crow, coming through on the heels of the civil rights movement and all of that, what it meant to have a new Black reality and have that seen, and not seen and defined by somebody else, but defined by us. This whole for us, you know, by us, for us vibe was real back then. You know, this was a moment of Black power, of taking back this idea of beauty and power and owning that as Black people. We hadn't seen that on television before. So it was really, it was happening at a moment of Black power television. It was created, and luckily it was just at the moment when color television had just happened. So to see Black people in color, that was really remarkable. And it was exciting I'm sure it was exciting for Ellis Hayslip to be creating that narrative and really showing this complexity of Black life in a way that was unapologetically Black.
But it also came out of the response to social movement, to the urban
Exactly.
rebellions, to the civil rights movement, to the Black Power movement, that forced the space for this to be on television, that it had to be there. And I think that's an important aspect too, that the changes that come about in the society or in the world in general are about pressures from social movement and organizing. So that's really important too.
That is a really important message, and why I wanted that to come out now, because of how we are changing the culture now too, and that we are on this, eve of great racial reckoning. And well, we can talk about that later, but this idea that there are parallels with the struggles and the movements that we have now, and the struggle for liberation then. It's just harder to make that connection, and so we were trying to do that with the film.
And I mean, the images are so vibrant. I mean, it is colorful. I mean, it was some of the aspects of the film that that are revealed about differentiating Soul from other sort of entertainment programs. People weren't lip syncing; they were performing live.
Yeah,
and that's amazing too. That
it is so amazing. And it's so funny because as our freedom in this country is so new, and our liberation, our images and our self images of creating our own images, all that is so new that even this sort of current generation, we think it started with Soul Train, and that's fabulous, but you have to recognize that something came before that. And Soul really set the paved the way, if you will, for Soul Train. And maybe many people don't know that. And Ellis Haizlip was actually friends with Don Cornelius.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and he was part of the reason that he encouraged Don Cornelius to take his show, which was a radio show in Chicago, and bring it to LA and make it visible on television based on the success that he had experienced in Soul. So we always wanted to interview Mr. Don Cornelius so that we could get that on camera. Unfortunately, he joined the Ancestors before we were able to interview him, but we just needed that connection so that we always remember that Black seeds keep on growing, which is the theme of the film. And I think because of Ellis's success, and Ellis was an inclusionist, he was trying to bring everybody with him. I think of Soul as like the tide that raised all boats for that moment, because even though there was Black public affairs shows like It Is, Black Journal, and many others, Inside Bedford-Stuyvesant, his show was taking culture and saying that Black culture matters, because believe it or not, at the time, they weren't checking for Black poetry. They weren't checking for Black dance. It wasn't established. It wasn't justified or validated. So he was saying, no, all of this matters, and we're going to show all of it to you on television.
And also the integration of the performing arts and poetry and music with the politics and ideas. So that also made the program really unique.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And I wanted to read a quote from a dear friend of mine. He wrote to me, Dawood Bey, who's an amazing artist. And he said, one of the things about Soul that I keep thinking about and that made Ellis so brilliant conceptually was that his vision of Black culture was not parochial, subscribing to no orthodoxy. So even as that particular moment that Soul came into being, it almost demanded that one choose a side, and that Ellis didn't choose a side. So Baraka believed that all Black art must serve a revolutionary function. And then Ellis could also accommodate him and the Black church and the Delphonics and Al Green. So he was sort of blending the sacred and the profane, the high culture and the low culture. And he goes on to say he says the sacred and the secular, the carnal, the ambitiously expressive, the revolutionary, and the unabashed romanticism of the Dells. Ellis rightly saw that all of it, when brilliantly articulated, was a piece of the culture. Yet another aspect of who we are that needed to be foregrounded. And he refused to take any side but the side of Black in its most elevated forms. I couldn't say that better myself.
That's great.
It's really, and that's why when you look at the show, and as we tried to show in the film, you're just seeing so much. You just can't believe you're seeing Nikki Giovanni and interviewing James Baldwin, but you're also seeing, The Last Poets, and then you're seeing Gladys Knight, and then maybe you're seeing, um, an incredible jazz musician. My head explodes when I try to catalog it, because you really can't. That there were 130 episodes of this pure Black talent.
130 episodes. Well, I was going to ask you how many there were.
130 over the period of 5 years. Yeah.
Wow.
We couldn't get it all into the film.
Well, as I said
But
before, I watched it. I mean, I remember, I think I was in high school when I discovered it. And I'm going to invite other people to do what I'm about to do, is to, if they were around then or saw some of the episodes, which ones are the ones they really remember. They can put that in the chat. Mine were, well, of course, one you have in the film, the Ashford and Simpson performing. I knew their songs, because they worked at Motown and everything, but I'd not seen them perform. Well, they hadn't performed, right? So this was their first time. So that to introduce them as performers. So that was incredible. But the thing I remember too was there was I think Joe Tex was a guest host.
Yes.
And Maya Angelou came on, and this is the first time she was talking about I Know Why the Caves Burst Sings. She read a part of the book, and the section about Joe Louis winning the fight in their town in Arkansas, listening to it. It was just amazing.
It's so amazing. And that particular moment was so important, because it was one of those things where Ellis, of course, had been friends with Maya for a long time, because he was friends with everybody, these legitimate friendships. He wasn't out there clout chasing, as we say today, but he literally had invested in the culture so deeply, and in the arts and in theater, and everybody knew him, and they really valued that friendship. We tried to bring that across in the film. But the fact that you had Maya Angelou, and she was literally reading from, I don't think the book had been published yet, but she was on in March 1970, and it was like she was reading from the gallows version of the book. So it was, like almost like a manuscript form. And when she read it, and she read it in her own voice and her own cadence, it sounds like she's just telling you a story. And the idea that Ellis Haizlip would be so generous to invite other guest hosts and musicians and people that you wouldn't normally expect to see.
I wouldn't think of Joe Tex as being the person interviewing,
he also had Curtis Mayfield. He had Curtis Mayfield on hosting the show, several episodes. And he had the Iceman, Jerry Butler, hosting several episodes. He was very generous. He was actually a reluctant host. He didn't want to be the person. He wanted to push the culture forward, but from behind. I can totally relate to that. I feel the same way. But, he was always wanting to expand people's expectations. And at the time when you were a Black performer, all you could do was shuck and jive and perform and dance, and that whole vibe that came out of the minstrel show, and Ellis didn't believe in that. He was like, these are people with ideas, with concepts, with needs and values. And he emboldened them to take over the show in a way, like the way you would take over a show now. And there were so many artists that you wouldn't expect to see, except doing their own set, who could actually sit down and talk. That was very meaningful to him.
So then there's a question in the chat, and one that I had too, about where folks can see the episodes. And I think that's in the chat where you can see the episodes.
Yeah, we got that in the chat. That's really important, because there are, right now, luckily, there are 24 digitized episodes that are up and running in several places. So you don't have to dig around. Like if you are a member of Amazon Prime, you can just go to Amazon Prime and type in like Amazon Prime /Soul, and you can watch 24 episodes on your big screen, which is amazing. If you don't have Prime, that's cool. It's also on Shout Factory TV, which it's like a show that, it's like a site that has a lot of retro shows and sort of retro television, but they also have those same episodes, and that's free too. So you can watch 24 of best hits. They also have, if you're a member of PBS, That is a paywall if you're not, but if you are a member, you can watch it on PBS Passport. And then there's a couple of hip new places like Tubi and Pluto that also have some episodes. And then there's some bootleg episodes on YouTube, because you know how we do. But I didn't put them there. I'm just saying.
No. And
I did
PBS
not
should be.
post them because that's a rights issue.
Yeah,
But yeah,
right.
you can see them on YouTube as well.
Now, I heard this from a friend of mine, Stephen Forward, who used to be at the Schomburg
Schomburg, yes.
Library.
Shout out to Stephen. He helped me too.
Oh, okay. Good.
Oh, yes. I did a lot of research at the Schomburg. Yes. Shout out to the Schomburg.
That some of the episodes were taped over and lost. Is that right?
That is the worst thing I can ever share. I mean, there is worse news happening right now that happened last week. But if we just, keep it to soul, yes. And let me explain, because it sounds much more criminal than it is. But imagine a moment when archiving and this notion of archiving hadn't yet set in. It was in the late 60s, early 70s, and this was a live show. And what they did was they recorded it live to tape so that they could air it again, at the end of the week as a rerun. And part of it was that the culture of archiving live shows had not happened. It wasn't happening even in the NFL. They weren't archiving these classic games. They figured that out. ESPN has like a whole channel for archived classic games now. But a lot of those shows on PBS in the early 60s, late 60s, early 70s, American Dream Machine, a lot of them were not kept. And unfortunately, part of it, and I don't want to be incriminating, but allow me to say that part of it had to do with not really understanding the value of what they had. So sometimes, episodes were taped over. Sometimes they were thrown out. And sometimes it wasn't really until 1970 that they realized we better start saving all these shows. There is one full episode from the first season that exists. And it's because they were going to submit it for consideration for an Emmy. So the fifth show with The Last Poets from October 24th, 1968, it does exist in total. And then Ellis, of course, was very mindful of the culture he was documenting. So he saved some things. And that's why we have a clip from the very first show of Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells. It's the only clip we have from that. So, it's a larger discussion we could get into, probably better to get into offline. But this idea of, assigning value or ascribing value to Black culture, that's a whole nother conversation. And I don't want to get negative or anything, but this idea that certain things were not considered valuable, but it was also practical. Those were giant tapes, and there wasn't a lot of room, and they didn't have a lot of them. So they would erase them, tape over them, because you couldn't just keep adding to, all of these tapes in the closet. There just wasn't room for all of those live shows. So yeah, that is kind of a heartbreaking truth.
And was it a challenge for you that you had maybe an idea that you heard about the show and then
it was a big challenge. I died several deaths over and over and over because I knew what they were. We'd done so much copious research, pulling together TV guide listings, New York Times listings, looking at every single press release that was written by Ellis Hayslip and the Soul team and Channel 13 WNET, and seeing who was listed, looking at Ellis's diaries, which are now part of an exhibit at the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum in Washington, D.C. Not the Blacksonian on the mall, but there's a community Anacostia Smithsonian, and it has the Ellis Hayslip papers in it. He would write down everything in his little black book. And I looked at that too, to see who he was playing cards with that night, who he was hanging out with after the tapings, or having lunch with like Kathleen Cleaver after the taping. And so I could verify all the people who were on from 1968 to 1973 and figure out what was missing. And sometimes it was about having photographs. Chester Higgins, who was the original photographer, he has records of certain episodes that there's no physical tape for. So what we did was we recreated with visual effects in the film using a lot of photographs to give you that telegenic feel and make it look like an episode for the episodes that are missing. We did that for Arsenio Hall, for example. Nobody
Oh,
believed
right.
Arsenio was on the show because there's no tape of it. But luckily Chester was there and he took pictures. So we animated the pictures to make it look like it was the episode.
So he was, what, like, was he 12 years old or something like
15.
that? 15.
But it was his first time on television, and that's really significant because we know what happened to him, who he ended up being, right? So the ties between, Ellis Haizlip and Arsenio, that's pretty awesome. He was doing magic tricks, by the way.
Right. So the narration that Blair Underwood reads, that's from Ellis Haizlip's diary and journal?
Yes, and believe it or not, he was very outspoken. And he was always trying to get his message across. He talked differently to the Black press than he did to the white press. And unfortunately, those were very segregated at the time. So what I did was I looked under every rock. I researched for years, 10 years, every single time he was quoted, whether it was the New York Times, whether he was being interviewed for, when the show first premiered in 1968, he did a lot of interviews. Every time he said something, I pulled that quote. So you're seeing actual, and I can link those quotes. Actually, I should have thought of that. You can actually see some of them, like Jet Magazine is online now, and some Ebony issues, and you can see him quoted in Jet Magazine, Ebony, New York Times, the Sentinel, and all these different places. Then I went into his journals as well, and I looked at all his writings, letters that he'd written to people. So everything you see in the film is actually his words. I just had to write them into the script so that it was part of his voice, because we wanted him to be out front to tell his own story, which is hard sometimes when you have, someone who's deceased. How do you put them in the front of their story so it's not like, so they're participating? That was really important to make him come alive in that way. And what would Ellis say? What was Ellis thinking during that time? So it was really cool to do that.
I mean, I want to, well, at some point, maybe offline, what this film will do is start generating more investigation and research into the past shows. I'm curious if there are ever transcripts done of the episodes that are maybe lost or we can't find.
I've done them. I had to get granular. So I did the one transcript that is the most important, though, which is actually a transcript, is the transcript of the 2-hour special conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin. That was transcribed and made into a book, which is really exciting. And it was a book that you can now find. Mostly it's a rare book. Unfortunately, it's like $400 or something like that. But it was, at the time, James Baldwin was doing a lot of conversations like that. He did one with Margaret Mead, for example, but they weren't being recorded. So this idea of seeing him and then having that recorded, and then it was so significant. And I'm excited about that it was made into a book. But more importantly, I'm excited about the way people are responding to it now. Because, Amanda Seales posted it on her Instagram in like a year and a half ago in January of 2019, and it just went viral. And then people started talking about it, and you started seeing it everywhere. And, Essence magazine reposted it, Lena Waithe reposted it, and it took on a life of its own. And it's still really viral, but people never realized that was from Soul because they're so caught up in this extraordinary conversation between these Black, literary icons that it's hard to connect that to Soul. But it's very exciting. For me, that's like the highlight, the greatest transcript of all. It's really remarkable. I wish we could have made a whole film about that.
So, and how many stations do we know have it presented the show in syndication?
Yeah, there were all of the major. There were like 9 major stations around the country. So it was like New York, LA, Philly.
That's where I saw.
Yeah. Okay. I wrote that down somewhere. Wait, hold on. I got that. It was in all of the major cities. Here we go. It was, wait, let me read this to you because I wanted to make sure I had that right. It was an unusual moment in time because there wasn't a lot of Black programming. And you have to remember that this was the moment when public broadcasting came into existence.
Yes.
So up until that moment, before the Public Broadcasting Act, there wasn't really a system of stations. There were just stations doing their own thing publicly around the country. So the significance of soul happening at that moment helped to get it out exponentially. And that was really, really key. So let me get back to you on that.
Okay.
But I do have that here. I meant to tell you because it was really important in the way that the Kerner Commission had impacted this, and then the different Harris poll that basically went around to all the Black communities and did a poll on the success of soul and how it was in all the major markets.
But something part of the reason I'm asking that question is because I'm astounded by how many people I encounter who are my generation, maybe a little older, more or less, and they find out about soul from the film, Mr. Soul. And they said, I didn't know anything about this. Did you know about something? Yeah, I know about this. I was like, this is Friday night. Where were you?
Well, it's interesting because I think that's what makes it kind of wonderful and accessible now. Because I love that there really are like two camps of people. They're the people who are like, this is the greatest show you never heard of. And then there are the people like, are you kidding? I lived for this show. And so it's like a reunion to be able to see and fall in love again with everything that you missed. But in a way, because it happened before the break, before digital media, it became somewhat of like this mythical Black unicorn. Like, did it really happen? Did it really exist? I heard about that show. So I'm happy that the film now is bridging that gap and helping people to discover it now, even if they didn't know about it then. And there are people who are super cultured, who know everything. And they literally get mad at me. And they're like, how come I didn't know about this? And I'm like, well, look at it this way. You get to discover something new.
Yeah, yes.
Culture, and that's really exciting because then you get to go on that journey and the film is enlightening. We wanted it to be enlightening, but we also wanted it to be, not just educational, but really uplifting. And we wanted it to be entertaining. And we wanted it to be exactly what Ellis wanted, which was this exploration of, Black love, Black strength, Black sister and brotherhood, Black courage, Black lives, and Black excellence. I really feel that we need that now more than ever. We need Ellis Haizlip's voice, to sort of restore the soul of our nation in a way. So I'm so happy the film is coming out now. We are upside down right now thanks to this administration, but I'm hoping that, in 10 days we'll be in a better place. But it's really important to hold on to our culture and to hold on to the beauty of who we are and what we can do.
One of the things too also is the film is showing how the program is cross-generational and dialogue. And that's, I think, something that we desperately need now too. But
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things posted in the chat and questions, we should get around there, was that
we got a lot in the chat.
That in the South, that the region, that public TV there, maybe not just there, but specifically there, was Black programming, anything that was progressive at all, but particularly Black programming, was basically censored.
Well, there is that too. And you have to remember that too, that these stations were given the choice of what they wanted to. And we touch on that in the film as well, that sometimes stations chose not to air this show, or they thought it was too Black, too strong, too radical. This idea of Black radicalism was terrifying the nation. It was terrifying, J. Edgar Hoover enough to create COINTELPRO. And I still haven't gotten an answer back on my FOIA request about Ellis Haizlip, because I know folks were checking for him because he had the Black Panthers on there, and the Black Panthers were considered the enemy of the state at that time. And and so this idea that this was a platform for the free political expression, and this expansion away from what we were seeing on television, all the poverty and all the the riots and the things that are the criminality associated with Blackness. It was a window into who we really could be and who we are. Folks weren't, that was threatening in many time zones, shall we say. So that is part of the reason why the series may not have been seen everywhere, or may have been put on late at night when you wouldn't see it. It wasn't automatically prime time. It really was being censored. We're so excited to not censor the material now. And even though there are some rather sensitive topics in there, I really felt like it's not my job to censor him when he went through so much censorship 50 years ago. I'm just going to present this content as it is and do our best to, have the best people speak about it, and to allow folks to feel enlightened or challenged or whatever their response may be.
Well, connected to that, you have incredible interviews with a lot of different people, and and even though I watched the series then, I don't remember Ellis speaking with Louis Farrakhan, and
Ooh.
it is quite extraordinary. I thought Ellis was very brave to do that, and to bring up the issue of homosexuality, and when he could have just not dealt with it, but he did point blank, and so I'm glad you put that in the film, and having a Black queer man confront, or at least pose the question with Louis Farrakhan. So talk about your decision to include that.
That was a really challenging editorial decision to make. Namely, what I just said about not wanting to censor him. And I was told by many folks, just remember, our film is publicly funded, and we have funds from the government. We have funds from the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities. And thinking about what everybody's mandates are and how best to exemplify them with the content and quality of our film, we also have to recognize whatever content that we have may still be very sensitive, let's say. I'm like searching over here. Where's the word? Sensitive. Okay. So, but what we chose to do, and we do know that he is a difficult and rather complex character. Minister Farrakhan is both loved and reviled, and has different reputations, of course, and we acknowledge that, and that, of course, the connection with not only homophobia, but anti-Semitism. And, there are a lot of things that he's associated with that are not positive.
Yeah.
And we recognize that. But what we wanted to do in this instance, because it was relating to the story of Ellis, was we wanted to show this moment in terms of illuminating Ellis's bravery, as you said. And so that we chose that particular part of the episode because he goes on and he goes off in that episode. He also literally stands up and preaches to literally his own constituents, because Ellis was very smart. He filled the room with Nation of Islam. That entire audience was NOI. And so he could feel comfortable. And so what interested me in that particular clip was that it was very, very complex and very nuanced and very layered, because you're seeing two leaders who are two Black men who are diametrically opposed. And you're seeing, the Nation of Islam leader, which is notoriously homophobic and has been very unwelcoming to, same gender loving folks. And you're seeing a gay man who is openly gay, but it's his turf and it's his show. And so I was interested in the dynamics of the Black family here, right? Okay. And how Black men, and how we as a diaspora, as a people in general, we lift each other up. We don't tear each other down. Some do, but for the most part, we don't. We have enough tearing us down in the first place anyway. Hard enough to be Black in this country, right? And so what I was interested in was what it was sort of like, game recognizes game. Like these two gentlemen with completely different realities and beliefs, but it was Ellis's show. So he was acknowledging this man who was a leader of his, group, but he was also acknowledging the problems that he had because he was speaking for himself and on behalf of queer people everywhere, which was not even said. And I don't even know of a show that with someone mentioning the word homosexuality in 1971 or two, I think it was. I don't even know if that exists because remember, Soul started before Stonewall. So this idea of, wearing your, your gender representation, anything like that on your sleeve was not possible at all. And we just have to contextualize that. And so to show Ellis standing up to him and the bravery and the complexity of what that meant, and that he was still giving a platform to this man because he recognized that he was leader of his own world, that said so much, so many levels. And, Black folks, we just have levels. We are just levels, our levels have levels. So it was just really important to show that complexity. And then it's interesting to do a conversation with Lena Waithe and, and as a proud, queer Black woman and what that meant to her and how it was mind blowing to her and how it actually made her very uncomfortable. And we talked about that. And so it's very interesting to talk to folks now and to get their feelings about that. And, but it was one of those moments when I chose that I wasn't going to silence him. And we were going to present this aspect because that's what we were speaking to in the film, Ellis's bravery.
Yeah, I was amazed and glad that he did. And I was uncomfortable too. I was like, oh, what's going to happen here?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
But isn't that the truth, right? Like we are not a monolith. And I think Ellis was presenting all those different sides of our culture and saying, I welcome the disagreement. I recognize we recognize what's happening out here, that we were all different people with different viewpoints and different beliefs. That totality is Blackness. We're not just going to show one side of Blackness. And I think that's what was really, really groundbreaking and revolutionary about his approach to Black culture and the holistic approach to it. Not holistic like, good health, but in total.
Had you thought of, you reached out to some of the other people who have been on the program. Had you thought about reaching out to Louis Farrakhan to?
Now that is a directing choice I made because the choice that we made was to show Ellis at this moment, not to have Farrakhan comment on the moment. Because Farrakhan was the guest on the show, yes, but this was we needed to illustrate Ellis's bravery as a Black queer man on television. And that was the moment that we were serving in the story at that time.
I just had to ask.
We did not reach out, Mr. Farrakhan. But I also thought, in terms of dealing with that kind of issue, it was safe to just show the content of the of the archive as opposed to bringing it into the contemporary context of how he is right now.
Okay, sure. I just want to remind people that the film is going to be broadcast on the Independent Lens series on PBS on February 22nd. So check local listings wherever you are.
Black History Month, come through.
Right.
Get into it.
That's great. And tell everybody, who can far and wide that watch this great film. I want to go to the Q&A because I'm afraid I'm missing a lot of stuff. And maybe Elizabeth, there's some questions here that I'm having.
I have the questions from the chat. Do you want to look at one in the Q&A box first?
Yes. Yeah. Let's see.
Oh, you're going to make it big so everybody can see? That's cool.
So much of the TV. I'm curious if the Central Archive of Soul episodes or was extensive research involved. Well, you said that. Would you be interested to know how long it took to assemble it? How long do you have?
Well, it took us 10 years to make the film.
Mhm.
So assembling it, we were really still assembling it. There was a moment when we stopped looking. You
Mhm.
know, I had been on, there was a tremendous amount of research that went into the film, and the R&D, the research and development, and shout out to Black Public Media for being the first to, you know, fund our research and
Mhm.
development, which is really important. And trying to assemble all the pieces, because we had 46 physical episodes from WNET, but we knew there were 130 episodes, so we were sort of on this kind of wild goose chase in a
Uh,
way, or like private detective. I mean, I did everything to turn
mhm.
over every rock and to see where we could find these collections. Not only just canvassing the people who were on the show, and
Mhm.
people like the sound guy, like maybe the sound guy has some, you know, we had to be super creative around trying to piece it together. And that did take a very, 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 very long time. And I'm still convinced that there might be some episodes out there. You know, we were reaching out to soul heads in London and the UK and places, other places where people didn't have our sort of racist history. And so they were much more appreciative of the soul culture.
Mhm.
That was interesting to me to like figure out, well, who, you know, where are the various archives and collections and people's, you know, and often I would get a hold of people and they would say, "Oh, I've got the best soul archive," but it would turn out to be things we already had. So
Okay.
we were always doing that and trying to
Mhm.
figure out, you know, sort of collectively, and it was very forensic, you know, and I had to go down so many rabbit holes. Luckily I'm that kind of person, so
But it was only broadcast in
patience
the
for the rabbit
US,
hole.
right? In US and maybe US and Canada, but
Say it
never.
again?
It was only broadcast in the US and maybe
Yeah.
the okay,
Yeah, but
not
you'd be
other.
surprised. Like when I talked to Questlove, Questlove had like every episode. And I was like, dude, how'd you get that?
Mhm.
You know, and he is like a living, walking encyclopedia of soul culture anyway. And
Mhm.
he had watched as many episodes as existed, and had told me that he'd actually modeled the set that the
Mhm.
Roots would do
Mhm.
after different sets that he saw on Soul. It was very influential for him. So there are collectors out there who have a lot of episodes, and I just tried to find every one and literally go down the list. And or it was as real as me like sitting in Anna Maria Horsford's house and going through her, you know, DVDs that she had that someone had burned for her like back in the 90s or something, you know,
Mhm.
and not being able to leave the house. Like she's
Okay.
like, "You can stay in the living room, but you're not leaving with my soul tapes." And I was like, okay,
Okay.
you can trust me, but okay.
That's funny.
So yeah, we did what we had to do to get it done. It took a long time, yeah.
Well, there's the question about releases for all the people who were in the film, which I'm sure was also a big task.
Yes, this is a very rights intensive film. You
Mhm.
can really appreciate that because not only are you dealing with this music, but you're dealing with like premium artists, right? And
Mhm.
so we had to go to great lengths, tremendous lengths to get not only clearances for the footage that you see, but also clearances for the music, which means the publication of the music and
Mhm.
also the license, the sync license to have the right to air that music or use that music in the film. So yeah,
And
there's
that makes it complicated about which markets you can release it on: theatrical,
right.
broadcast,
So what you have to do,
consumer.
what we did because we thought it's so important for Black culture, Black history, and I, you know, having for those of you who know, you know, the great documentary, the civil rights documentary Eyes on the Prize,
Mhm.
I learned my lesson because I know that that was like the greatest doc of all time, but they hadn't cleared the all the rights for that archival well into the future. And so in order to re-release it, they had to go back and do a lot of clearances. So we decided up front that we would bite the bullet and clear
Mhm.
everything for all rights, all media in perpetuity. But of course, that grant of rights is much more expensive
Mhm.
as opposed to just clearing it for festivals or just clearing it for television or something.
Mhm.
We realized that we wanted this to be an opportunity for people to see in case it disappears or in case it's not accessible. I really think the archive should be accessible to everyone.
Mhm.
You know, it was made for the people, it was made for public television. I don't think people should have to pay to see it, but that's my own you know, hill to die on. So we made sure that this film would be cleared, and so we wouldn't get in trouble, and B, so that
Right.
many people could see it and it could be used
Mhm,
as an educational tool,
mhm,
for years and years. And right now we have an educational distributor who's going to
mhm.
put it into like thousands of universities, within the next couple of months. And that to me is just extraordinary, to think.
Can you say who that is right now, or you're still negotiating?
No, we're still negotiating. Well,
Okay.
we've signed it, but it's not fully uploaded yet,
Okay.
onboarded yet.
Okay.
But I will let you know very
Okay.
soon.
And with a question about a soundtrack for the documentary.
Yes, come through soundtrack. We are working on that.
Okay.
The soundtrack, the music is so exquisite, and we're actually going through that right now, making a decision about what it will be and whether we'll use the original music from the show, or
Mhm.
whether we'll use, the music that was licensed. Um, so that is something that we're doing right now, like as a making artistic decisions about that. But we have this incredible song, the song by that's sung by Layla Hathaway at the
Mhm.
end. The whole score is written by Robert Plasper, extraordinary. So we want to release that song on a soundtrack. So that's
Mhm.
why. So that'll probably come out next year,
Okay.
in time for the Grammys and all the music, next year.
Mhm. Mhm.
Or actually,
We're into it
I'm sorry,
2020.
I forgot where we are. Yeah, no, it's going to come out this year in time for the Grammys next year. Yeah. So
Okay.
we'll be releasing that hopefully before September of
Mm.
2021 of this year.
Okay. So
That's gonna be lit, y'all. I cannot
I
wait.
can't
And
wait.
I'm really hoping that we can do, be modern about it and have
Mm.
like, Spotify lists, and we just want everyone to dig it. And Robert Glasper did such a great job writing new music and a lot of music for the film. So
Mhm.
he's just an extraordinary artist, just it was incredible to work with him. I gotta tell you a story about him. He came to see what we did something called a washdown, and with
Mhm.
the music supervisor. So it's when he comes in for the first time and watches down the film. I've already made my own dream, soundtrack. So I have done what's called temp score. So I
Mhm.
pulled all my favorite music. Of course, I knew we couldn't license it, but I put that in and edited it into the film so you could see the film the way I designed it. And then I wrote out a list of, okay, so we're not going to be able to have Maiden Voyage from Miles Davis, but let's have a Maiden Voyage-esque like
Mhm.
vibe here. And so like I told him where all the songs we would need to write original music for. And he came into the watchdown and I was so nervous. I was like, oh my God, it's Robert Glasper. And I had cookies, I had snacks, I had all the things to keep him there. And he shot out of his chair in like 10 minutes into the film. And I was like, oh boy, he's probably so famous, he's getting a call. He went out into the lobby with his phone. And all I can think of was like, oh no, like maybe he's gonna have to go. Who knows? Maybe somebody, Common's calling him, or somebody he works with all the time, Bilal or something. And then so I went out after about 5 minutes and I was like, is everything okay? Can I get you something? And he was singing into his phone. And I was like, he's singing. And he's like, oh, I'm actually composing right now. I'm so inspired by what I've seen. Like I'm writing the music and I heard this melody
Wow.
in my head and I just wanted to get it down. And I was like, like what? That was so incredible, and he was so inspired by the film right away to think that he was like literally writing the
Mm.
song on his cell phone. That just blew me away. That's the kind of mind he has.
Well, the film, I think, has that impact on anybody who sees it, that they're excited by what's there, and
Yeah.
if they had talents and wanted to contribute something, they would do that. If their contribution was to let everybody know about it, and they need to go see
Yeah.
it.
And he
Yeah.
also, Robert occupies this rare space where he is so steeped in all of the traditions, even though he can write anything, and he recorded our whole soundtrack with no music, no lead sheets, no score, no nothing. Just
Mhm.
these incredible artists who could just get a vibe in a second and then hit it on the first take. It was just the most mind-blowing experience I've ever had. I was like, okay, this is where we need that little maiden voyage kind of Herbie Hancock vibe. And he was like, let's do these couple of changes, and then went in and then just hit it and nailed it. One take. We had 146 cues in this film.
Wow.
146 music
Wow.
cues. A lot. And some of those were, archival, some of those were from Soul, but some of them had to be built and written and composed. And so
Hmm.
it was just really exciting to work with him as a young mind and to think who he would bring in to collaborate, and bringing in Layla Hathaway, and knowing I had started the film with Johnny Hathaway, and then he created a song for her to sing at the end. And I'm like, well, there you have it right there. That's the journey of soul, the father of soul and the first daughter of soul. It was just really spectacular.
You had mentioned also earlier, and I don't know if it went to the chat, about the in August there was a basically a virtual premiere, and all the people who had been a lot of people involved in the film participated.
That was really great. And I want to put that, I think we're going to put that in the chat, right, Elizabeth? We did something called a kickback. We opened on August 28th of this year. It was a wonderful night. It was also a very sad night because it turned out to be the same day that we lost Chadwick Boseman, our great king. And but we had planned to do like a big, what we call the kickback, where we could all like hang out on the weekend, which was going to be Sunday. And so we wanted to sort of create a vibe, like, because we were all at home and we couldn't have a premiere, the way you would have like people come on stage afterwards and just kick back. But instead we did this like virtual kickback, and the link is here. We recorded it on both Facebook Live. We had like 4,000 people on there, and it's also in our YouTube channel. And so we wanted Amanda Seales to host it, because she's like a modern day Ellis Haizlip, the way she curates the culture with all of her incredible podcasts and her shows, and Insecure, and all the different amazing work that she does. We love this idea of her as like a modern day Ellis. And then she got to interview all these people from the film and people from Soul. So we had Nikki Giovanni, and we had The Last Poets, and we had Sonia Sanchez. Oh my gosh, it was like an all-star game. We also had Stan Lathan, who many of you know is a great director. Well, he was one of the first directors on Soul, and he directed some of the greatest episodes of Soul. And we also knew he had directed Amanda's first stand-up comedy show. So like these parallels of people starting in the 60s and now working today, that was really important to make it a contemporary vibe. Blair Underwood was on there. Of course, Robert Glasper and Layla Hathaway. And Robert was in the studio. And then he said, I got a surprise for you, Melissa. And at the end of the talk back, he's like, oh, I got a surprise for you. And then here comes Common, because they were like recording in the studio. And I was like, what? Okay, I've got Nick and Giovanni and Common in my Zoom. I think I'm gonna die. It was just so great. And it was so important to bring in, as you said, this sort of multi-generational vibe of what Soul speaks to. And to have, Lena Waithe. Later on, we did a conversation with Lena Waithe. I think we put that in the chat too.
With her and Nikki Giovanni.
Yeah, with her and Nikki Giovanni, because it was Lena who kept posting links as well, clips from the James Baldwin, Nikki Giovanni. So it was just really exciting to have her in real time talking to Nikki Giovanni, and they'd never met before. And that was really dope. That was just so dope. So if you can check that out, I think we put that link in the chat.
There's a lot. I'm afraid I always miss some of the questions. So Elizabeth, is there anything questions that were posed that I didn't ask?
There are a few questions. Some of them they got covered in other questions that were asked. Maybe we can quickly respond to a few of them.
Great.
The film was extremely interesting, but I was definitely left wondering why there wasn't more of a fight to keep Soul on the air. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, absolutely. This was something that we struggled with, because there was a huge fight to keep Soul on the air. One of the things that we didn't really share in the film, because of the structure of the film, was that there was a fight every single year. So Soul was basically canceled after the first year. Ellis Haizlip had to fight for it and get funding for it for the second year. When you have a show that's publicly funded, in this case by the Ford Foundation and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, they gave it money the first year, and it was up to Ellis, and they didn't give as much money the second year and the third and the fourth and the fifth. And so
Mm.
he was struggling from jump to say, hey guys, this is a really popular show. It's our culture, it's our people, we need this. So he was constantly doing that. And as the show
Mm.
got better and better, and he was able to get bigger hosts, and you saw the production value, the real crisis happened when it wasn't going to be renewed after the fifth season. And we were trying to find a way to show just what that meant, because there were protests, there were people marching, there were people were being activists around the NAACP and the National Urban League, and people were trying. We didn't have Wi-Fi, we didn't have email. There were 20,000 letters that came in the film. I show a bunch of letters. There were 20,000. So think about what that means. I can't even equate what 20,000 handwritten letters. Some of them were written from people in jail. Some were written from white folks, some were written from like people who'd been on the show, and there were a lot of letters. And this notion of how do we keep this going and how do we fight? And so Ellis was trying to fight on air by trying to get people to support the film. But people like Felipe Luciano, who's from the streets, he was like, no, we got to get out there. And so what we showed in the film was the conflict and the difference between Ellis sort of having this, he had fought for so long, and he recognized that the show was not going to be funded no matter what he did. And he was more resigned to that than trying to keep up a fight that he knew he couldn't win. And so we had to show that in the film in a way that is a little bit unresolved. And remember that there was a bigger fight, because the mandate was removing the public funding was coming from Nixon, right? So you can't really fight that in a way. So we showed that too. And so we tried to bring together all these, sort of like a brief harmonic convergence of all these elements that were fighting against Ellis. And because of the person he was, he decided to say, you know what? They don't get it, that's their loss, kind of thing. But he always knew that it would find a place in the culture, and thank God it has now in our film and in several books that have been written about it. But yeah, it was really hard to visualize that struggle because there's no footage of these marches. There was no footage of Black people standing up at NAACP, at Urban League. So we had to kind of put together archival footage and have Felipe Luciano talk us through it, and just, visually and aesthetically to give you that feeling.
One, you mentioned books. One book is Black Power TV, and there's another book which
it's called It's Been Beautiful. Soul and Black Power TV. Yeah, it's written by Gail Wall. It's really wonderful.
Okay, thank you for that.
I should have
Okay.
read it.
Okay.
I read it in my other room. Before we go, I'll go grab it and show it to you.
What's Elizabeth? And are there other questions too?
There's one more question that I think you haven't touched on directly, and that's Nadia asks, what was the response after Farrakhan's appearance? Any backlash or LGBTQ support?
Now that is very interesting. I haven't heard a lot of. There was the way the backlash was shown at that time was any letters that came in, or the way like the phones would light up because everything was so analog at the time. But I didn't see any like physical backlash that I could record or that I could share. I did look for it, and I spent like literally years, weeks, months, years going through archives. Like I was the first person to go through the Ford Foundation archives when they left the Ford Foundation and came up to the Rockefeller Archive Center. I spent weeks there combing through papers and microfiche to try to find these smoking guns and everything. I did a lot of that because you have to remember that certain things would not be written about, but maybe they would be talked about in like board meetings or, end of the year sort of wrap ups. And so you would have to go and find records of those meetings. They wouldn't necessarily be in inter-office memos. For those of you who are old enough to remember that, the memo that was put in a brown envelope and circle it with, and you'd write off your name and pass it to the next person. It was just, it's really hard to find, you know, the ephemera, the actual written proof of these things. Ellis Hayslip contained a lot of it, and his collection, and he wrote a lot of his reactions and letters that he wrote to his own team. He actually would document all of that, and has like 2 versions of the letters. He has letters he wrote to James Baldwin and letters James Baldwin wrote back to him. Everything was kind of documented that way, but I don't have actual backlash from that episode per
So
se.
again, where are Ellis's papers?
It's at the Smithsonian, and it's in the Anacostia Smithsonian, which is
Okay.
it's an area in
In the Southeast DC?
Southeast, yeah, DC, in the Anacostia neighborhood. And there's a community museum there. And I am trying very hard to get a small pop-up, like a pop-up exhibit from that collection brought to the Smithsonian on the Mall, because the Smithsonian on the Mall is the one everyone's going to. But Ellis Hayslip's collection is a research only. And so it's like me and maybe 2 other people have researched it in all time, because you have to make an appointment, you have to put on your white gloves, you have to, go downstairs, and it's a whole vibe. But all of his stuff is kept off site. So I'm trying to change that. And I've been championing this idea of bringing Ellis back. And I'm hoping that by bringing Soul back, that we can have some of these things, even if it's just a picture. You've seen the cultural galleries at the new Smithsonian on the 4th floor. It's fabulous. And there's this whole television gallery. And you see like the genesis of television, from Flip Wilson to Oprah. But Ellis Hayslip needs to be on that wall too. So
I agree.
I'm
Definitely.
championing for that. They do have a couple of excerpts of his shows downstairs in the part of when you're traveling through the Black Power movement, and they have some like little video clips of it on display, but there's no real full mention of him yet. So I'm just trying to build him up so that he's not an unsung hero anymore.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Is there, I think we're almost at time where I could keep talking and
I
talking.
could talk forever.
Yes.
Y'all gotta hit me up on Instagram, and because I'm alone, I talk a lot when I get a chance. So
What
hit me up on
did you
Instagram.
want to leave us with about the film and the
Well,
experience?
just, we're really excited that it's coming back to PBS after 50 years. It's also the 50th anniversary of PBS. It's really exciting that it's coming back because it left so unceremoniously. So this is really a wonderful reunion. I hope everybody can watch it. We're going to be doing a lot of pop-up screenings of the film with Independent Lens has a community engagement. So, keep up with us, because we're going to be doing a lot of things that involve everyone, because we really want to bring it to the people and bring it back, because it's for us, it's a gift. So I would just want to thank you, and I want to encourage anybody out there who has an idea, especially filmmakers and creatives out there, to follow your dreams. I mean, it took me 10 years because it was hard to find funding, but our stories matter now more than ever. And I think that Ellis Hayslip's story and our story and our genesis as a people, our culture, it all really, really matters as we're moving into this new direction in our country. So shout out to all the makers out there. And just keep it in your heart,
Thank you very much, Melissa.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
again for making the film, and I'm thrilled that it's out there and that people can see it on TV next month on the
Can you believe that?
22nd.
February 22nd. Yeah. But we'll be doing a lot of events leading up to that. So please tell your friends. This is a DIY vibe, because we don't actually have a real distributor until we get on PBS. So the film itself, we put out ourselves, basically. So if you haven't seen it, you can watch it tonight. I think at least till, maybe midnight or so. And also, if you want to see it after that, you can check out our website, www.mrsoulmovie.com. And on the screenings page, we have like 25 virtual screening partners, and you can click on those and you can stream the film anytime. It's only $12, but you can stream it for 72 hours and share it with your friends and family.
Great.
And thank you for your support. Thank you to the museum, and thank you, Cornelius.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you, Melissa and Cornelius, so much for this super rich conversation. I really appreciate the time that you're giving us. I do also want to thank our co-sponsor for today, Black Public Media, and we look forward to more programs with them coming up. And I just want to repeat that Mr. Soul will be airing on PBS on February 22nd. I want to let you know that next up we have a special edition of African Diaspora Film Club on Sunday, January 24th, just 2 weeks from now. And it's going to be at 7 p.m., so note the later time. We'll be discussing the brand new award-winning documentary Softy about the provocative photojournalist Boniface Mwangi. And Mr. Mwangi and writer and director Sam Soko will join us for that discussion with Cornelius, of course. And Softy is available for viewing on Eventive today through January 24th. So check out our website calendar for details. I put the link in the chat. And I just want to mention that our next program with Black Public Media will be in February, and we'll be discussing How It Feels to Be Free, about a documentary about trailblazing Black female entertainers, Lena Horne, Abby Lincoln, Diane Carroll, Nina Simone, Cicely Tyson, and Pam Grier. And that discussion will be with director Yoruba Richin. The program will be on Sunday, February 21st at 5 p.m. and there'll be a screening of that film on PBS next Monday, January 18th at 9 p.m. But we'll have more information about that on our website soon. So please, I also put a link to a survey in the chat. If you could take a moment to give us feedback about this program, we would love to hear that from you. And please continue to support the museum and support the work of all Black creators like Melissa mentioned. So thank you all and have a beautiful evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.